Okay, so we're just going to have a little bit of a chat about some of the best practices in trading. Get a lot of questions about why all of the export hasn't necessarily settled, or why things aren't matching, that kind of thing. And very often, a lot of the times, the answer is just what's happening in the market at any particular time. But a lot of times, there's just some good practices to stick to that should maximise the amount sold, if that's what your goal is. I'll start with this example I have here on the screen. This is a typical battery customer who's charging in the middle of the day and then exporting in the evening. At the time of recording this video, we've had pretty mild prices in the market, so we haven't been seeing very, very high evening prices. So a lot of battery customers are turning to the peer-to-peer market to enhance their revenue and try and get a decent constant price through the evening when that's still a peak time where people are using electricity. Here's an example. This is just today, 29th of April, and we have no purchasing going on during the day. Clearly, this customer feels that the spot prices are low enough during the time they're charging, and they're selling in the evening. Now, there's a couple of questions I often get around this. One is, or probably the most common one is, why hasn't everything sold? And there's generally two answers to that based on the shading. So firstly, maybe if we just say, well, maybe you haven't sold at all, we could try looking at the sell electricity, make an offer. Go back to today, the 29th, and look at, say, 5 p.m. to, say, 9 p.m., so that we know exactly when we're selling. So it's telling us that no energy is available to be sold at this time. Now, this is a frequent point of confusion because people can see this little light green, which usually means that there's energy to be sold, but it can have a second meaning. So firstly, the parts that are grey are what we call standing in the market. So you'll see, if we get right on them, we can see here that there's an amount, about 1/4 of a kilowatt hour, that is being put onto the market, and it's being put on the market at 50 cents per kilowatt hour. And so that part hasn't sold, whereas the trades that were put on at 40 cents per kilowatt hour have matched. So that's just a simple price discovery process in the market. If you're selling in the market and all your available to sell is shaded grey, it basically means that no one's buying at that time for that price. It might be a common thing if you sell a flat price all through the day, you'll see that this time will all match, whereas you'll have a lot of grey shading over here because people will want to pay different prices at different times of the day. So that's the simplest explanation for these grey areas that you see, that they're still standing in the market. Probably just means maybe next time just adjust your price a little lower, unless you're happy with having a go and potentially having some unsold. Now, the other common question is what about this light green part? It does look like there is energy available to sell, although the sell process is telling us that there is no energy available to be sold. Definitely, we do want to upgrade this web app to show that in a different shading and have a bit more legend around what that actually means. But we're not going to get there right away, so I think it's worth just explaining what that means. The rules of selling in Localvolts is that you're matching on expected usage or generation, and you're settling on actual usage and generation. So when this trade was put out, and we can actually see what times the trade, we can drill down in a minute to see what time they were put out, there was a certain expectation that a certain amount of energy would be generated. And then on the other side of the trade, on the buyer's side, there was an expectation that a certain amount would be consumed. Now, this gets more and more complex the more counterparties we have. We notice here we've got 4 different counterparties just in this one 5-minute interval. Now, it may be the case that between this trade being matched, i.e. put out for sale and then a buyer matching that trade, and now, which some days later, well, we look at it, well, it's still an expectation because it's still this evening. It could be that any one or all of those counterparties had a certain forecast, which has now been revised down. So what that means is we've actually matched at a higher level, and now the expectation is that we won't settle as much. So the forecast is being updated to show that. Now, we can't actually sell that energy to anyone else because at the moment, that buyer still might need all of the energy they matched because we're still only going on a forecast. We don't know until their meter data comes in what that actually is for today. So it's entirely possible that their forecast for today might be fairly low at this point, and what they actually might use this evening might be as high as the original forecast. So that ends up settling higher than it would have otherwise. So that's why you can't resell it, because you might find then that you've essentially oversold if they need the original energy plus you've sold it to someone else. The other reasons, these counterparties can be in different locations all around the country. If they are in a different region, so if, for example, if I'm in New South Wales and I'm selling to someone in South Australia or Tasmania, it's possible there can be interconnector constraints that can stop that trade going through. So that we tend to model the market so that if power is not flowing in that direction, then the interconnector won't let our trade go through. So then that becomes a non-delivery event. So that's also the potential that a counterparty might drop out on. So it gets more complicated the more counterparties, the more price points, etc., to actually figure out exactly what's happened, but it's all wrapped up in a fairly straightforward shading to say that the dark line is what we're currently expecting it to settle at. And then, of course, if we go back to the previous day, we generally expect that this is the settled amount. However, there still can potentially be some changes, because we might have, for example, sold to someone with a manually read meter, either in an interval or accumulation meter. And when their meter data comes in, there could be further adjustments to the actual settlement, depending on this. When the bill goes out, it's final, but while we're looking at it in the app, there's still potentially some changes.
So it sounds like this light green area has some sort of adjustment room built in for the difference between what you're forecasting, which seems to change depending as things move, and what actually happens at the end of the day when it's settled. So there's some sort of fudge room in there if I understood that correctly.
Yeah, it's essentially tracking the current expectation. Like until all the meter data comes in, we don't know what the trade settlement is going to be, but we always try to show the most up-to-date expectation. So, for example, what we could do alternately is show the matched amount continuously right up into the point in which we settle, where we have the actual meter data, but then we'll get really abrupt changes. So it'll look like, so today I'll be looking at it, it'll look like I'm going to sell 100% of my energy in the evening, and then tomorrow I have maybe a big drop down to 50%, and I'll be wondering what's happened. So it tends to show you the current expectation, doesn't mean it can't settle for more once the metadata comes in, but usually it is a reduction in expectation.
And I guess the weather is a major factor in how people are using energy as well.
Exactly. The weather, things like if people are away for a few days, or if people use certain appliances in a day that they haven't used every day previous to the week, that can be the difference between a forecast and an actual value. The key to this is it's the reliability of the matching really comes down to the reliability of the forecasts, and the reliability of the forecast obviously drops off the further out in time we go. So if I'm every overnight we get the metadata for the previous day of all the remotely read interval meters, and we generate then a forward-looking forecast every day off that and sort of update especially the short term of the forecast. So that if I take, for example, the last week of data and I'm forecasting today, I'm going to get a fairly good forecast probably of today, because it's unlikely my habits or the weather, my solar output, etc., my usage will change drastically in that day. Whereas if I'm forecasting for the same day in a month's time, it could be a completely different weather scenario. I might be off on holidays. There could be a number of things happening that drastically changes how I might decide not to export anymore in the evenings with a battery. So there could be some pretty big changes in a forecast, and that's more likely the further out we go.
So
the bottom line is,
what would you say is a safe sort of time frame to work with?
Well, I usually recommend that people trade one day out and setting up a rolling renewal. So they have a renewal that pretty much just sells for tomorrow every day. And that way you can adjust. You can do 2 days out, you can do 3 days out. But the benefit of that is that your forecast for tomorrow and the counterparty's forecast for tomorrow is about as good as it's going to get when it's 1 day out. And so you're much more likely to be selling more volume a day out than if you're selling a month at a time and then renewing every month, because you're getting forecasts that are very far out from the actuals that way. I've recommended that to a few people, and they've come back to me saying that they've sold a lot more volume doing it that way than the previous longer trading ways. The flip side, of course, is if you're going for more of a price outcome rather than a volumetric outcome, if you're trying to get the very highest price, you might want to be the first one in on a buy transaction at a certain price cap. So there's always a bit of a trade-off to these things, but if your focus is getting volume, then that'd be the way that I'd recommend to do it.
Okay, so I guess the one thing to remember then is if you are going on a longer time frame, you should expect some variability in the predicted outcome.
Yeah, definitely. You may find that customers you've sold to or even bought from, you don't get the fully matched amount ultimately settling. Now, of course, if you are still using that full amount of energy or still exporting that full amount of energy and you don't end up matching it, you'll still get paid the wholesale rate for it. So it'll always default back to the spot rate.
And at this time of the evening, looking at on the screen at the moment, the spot rate's generally quite good, isn't
it? It can be it depends. It's very seasonal and very dependent on time of day. It can be, in this case, for example, the export revenue, the estimate here is 8.6 cents, whereas the seller here is trying to get 40 cents to basically enhance the revenue. That will, of course, change. Some evenings, the actual spot price might be well in excess of these sorts of figures. It really just depends on on the time of year, on the weather. As we get into winter, we'll probably see a little bit more evening volatility. It's been very mild lately, very mild weather and very mild prices. So yeah, it's always worth adjusting your strategy to. It's not to a certain extent it can be set and forget, but also it's always worth just having a look and seeing if it's all selling at the price you're setting.